Sarah clutched the worn wooden cross hanging around her neck as she knelt beside the fresh grave. The morning dew had settled on the dark earth, making it shine like tears under the pale sunlight. 3 days had passed since they buried her husband, Michael, but the pain felt as fresh as the moment she watched them lower his coffin into the ground. Her 6-month-old daughter, Emma, stirred in her arms, making soft cooing sounds that seemed so out of place in this moment of grief. The baby had no idea that her father would never come home again, never hold her during those late-night feeding sessions, never sing the silly lullabies he made up on the spot. "Michael, I don't know how to do this alone," Sarah whispered to the headstone. The words carved into the granite seemed so final, so permanent. Michael James Peterson, beloved husband and father. The dates below showed a life cut short at just 28 years old. The accident had happened so suddenly. One moment Michael was driving home from his job at the construction site, and the next moment Sarah was getting a phone call that changed everything. A drunk driver had run a red light, hitting Michael's truck head-on. The doctor said he died instantly, that he didn't suffer. Sarah supposed that was meant to be a comfort, but it only made her feel more alone. As she sat there in the cemetery, Sarah heard footsteps approaching on the gravel path. She looked up to see a tall, weathered man walking toward her. He wore simple clothes, dark pants, and a heavy jacket, and his boots made crunching sounds on the small stones. His face was lined with age and experience, and his eyes held a kind of sadness that seemed familiar. "Excuse me," the man said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I didn't mean to interrupt. I saw you here and thought you might need someone to talk to." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her free hand. "I'm fine, thank you. Just saying goodbye." The stranger nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "I lost my wife 6 months ago. Cancer. The doctors fought hard, but sometimes fighting isn't enough." Something in his voice made Sarah look at him more carefully. There was genuine pain there, the kind that only comes from real loss. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said automatically, the words people had been saying to her for days. "My name is Daniel," the man said. "Daniel Crawford. I live about 20 minutes from here up in the mountains. I come here sometimes to visit Margaret's grave." He pointed toward a section of the cemetery where older headstones stood. "Sarah Peterson," she replied, adjusting Emma in her arms. "This is Emma, my daughter." Daniel's eyes softened when he looked at the baby. "She's beautiful." "How old?" 6 months. She was born just before Christmas." Sarah's voice caught slightly. Michael had been so excited about Emma's first Christmas, had already bought way too many presents. "That's a good age," Daniel said quietly. "Old enough to smile, but young enough to need her mother for everything." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people united by grief in this place of endings. Daniel seemed to be thinking about something, weighing his words carefully. "Can I ask what happened?" he said finally. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to." Sarah found herself wanting to talk, needing to put the story into words again. "Car accident. A drunk driver hit my husband's truck 3 nights ago. Michael was coming home from work, probably thinking about dinner, probably thinking about seeing Emma." Daniel shook his head slowly. "Senseless. Those are always the hardest losses to accept." "The police said the other driver walked away without a scratch." Sarah continued, the bitterness creeping into her voice. "He was arrested, but that doesn't bring Michael back. That doesn't help me figure out how to raise Emma alone." "You have family nearby? Parents, siblings?" Sarah shook her head. "Michael and I moved here from across the country when he got the construction job. We don't know many people yet. My parents died when I was young, and Michael's family lives in California. They said they'd help, but what can they do from so far away?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, looking out across the cemetery where other grieving people moved slowly between the graves. "Being alone with a baby is one of the hardest things in the world," he said finally, "especially when you're dealing with loss." "I keep thinking I hear Michael's truck in the driveway," Sarah admitted. "Or I'll turn around expecting to see him, expecting him to take Emma so I can shower or eat something. The house feels so empty now. How are you managing? Financially, I mean. I don't mean to pry, but these things matter when you're on your own." Sarah shifted Emma to her other arm. The baby was getting heavier, and her own strength seemed to be fading every day. "Michael had some life insurance through work, but it's not much. Maybe enough to last 6 months if I'm careful. After that," she trailed off, not wanting to think about the future. "What kind of work did you do before the baby?" "I was a nurse at the hospital in town. I was planning to go back when Emma was a year old, but now I don't know. Daycare is expensive and I don't have anyone to help with childcare. Daniel nodded, understanding the impossible mathematics of single parenthood. The hospital job, do they know about your situation? They sent flowers for the funeral. Said my position would be waiting when I'm ready. But ready for what? To leave Emma with strangers all day? To work 12-hour shifts and barely see my own daughter? Emma began to fuss in Sarah's arms, making the small hungry sounds that meant feeding time was approaching. Sarah looked down at her daughter, at the tiny face that looked so much like Michael's, and felt the familiar mixture of love and overwhelming responsibility. She's getting hungry, Sarah said. I should probably head home. Of course, Daniel said. But Sarah, if you don't mind me saying, you shouldn't have to go through this alone. There are people who understand, people who want to help. Sarah looked at him curiously. What do you mean? I mean that sometimes the hardest part of loss is accepting that you can't do everything by yourself. Sometimes you need to let other people care for you and your child. There was something in his tone that made Sarah pause, something that suggested he wasn't just offering general comfort. Are you talking about something specific? Daniel seemed to consider his words carefully. I'm talking about the fact that Emma needs things you might not be able to give her right now, and you need things that might be hard to find on your own. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Emma's fussing turned into full crying, and she knew she needed to get home for feeding time. But Daniel's words stayed with her as she walked back to her car, carrying her daughter and wondering what kind of help a stranger might be offering. Sarah spent the rest of that day thinking about her encounter with Daniel Crawford. There had been something in his manner, something in the way he looked at Emma, that stayed with her long after she returned home to the small apartment she and Michael had rented when they moved to town. The apartment felt different now, filled with reminders of a life that no longer existed. Michael's coffee mug still sat in the sink from the morning of the accident. His work boots remained by the front door, caked with dried mud from the construction site. Sarah couldn't bring herself to move these things, but seeing them made her heart ache. Emma had fallen asleep after her feeding, giving Sarah a few precious moments of quiet. She used this time to go through the mail that had been piling up since the funeral. Bills, sympathy cards, and official documents that she didn't understand. The insurance paperwork alone filled an entire folder, written in language that seemed designed to confuse rather than help. The knock at her door came just as the sun was setting. Sarah peered through the peephole and saw Daniel Crawford standing on her doorstep, holding what appeared to be a covered dish. I hope you don't mind me stopping by, Daniel said when she opened the door. I asked around town and someone gave me your address. I brought dinner. Figured you might not be cooking much these days. Sarah hesitated. She barely knew this man, but something about him felt safe, trustworthy. That's very kind of you. Come in. But I should warn you, the place is a mess. Daniel stepped inside, looking around the small living room with its scattered baby items and unopened sympathy cards. Looks like a home where someone's dealing with real life, he said simply. Nothing wrong with that. He set the covered dish on the kitchen counter. It's just a casserole. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep you fed for a few days. You really didn't have to do this, Sarah said, but the smell of the food made her realize how little she'd been eating since Michael's death. Actually, I did have to, Daniel replied. See, I know what it's like to be where you are right now. After Margaret died, I barely ate for weeks. People kept bringing food and I kept refusing it, thinking I could handle everything myself. Sarah gestured for him to sit on the couch while she checked on Emma, who was still sleeping peacefully in her crib in the bedroom. When she returned, Daniel was looking at the photographs on the mantel. Pictures of Sarah and Michael's wedding, Emma's first photos from the hospital. He looks like he was a good man, Daniel said, pointing to a picture of Michael holding newborn Emma. He was. He was so excited about being a father. He read every baby book he could find, practiced changing diapers on stuffed animals. Sarah's voice broke slightly. He was going to teach her to fish, to ride a bike, all those things fathers do. Daniel nodded. And now you're wondering how you're going to do all of that yourself. I don't even know how I'm going to manage next week, let alone years from now, Sarah admitted. Emma needs so much, and I feel like I'm failing her already. I'm so tired I can barely think straight, and she depends on me for everything. That's what I wanted to talk to you about, Daniel said, his tone becoming more serious. I have a proposition for you, something that might help both of us. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. What kind of proposition? Daniel leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. Like I mentioned, my wife died 6 months ago. We lived up in the mountains, pretty isolated. Margaret and we tried for years to have children, but it never happened for us. When she got sick, one of the things she regretted most was never being a mother. I'm sorry, Sarah said, not sure where this was leading. The thing is, I'm not built for living alone. The house is too quiet, too empty, and I keep thinking about what Margaret would want, how she would want to help if she could see your situation. Emma began to cry from the bedroom, and Sarah excused herself to get the baby. When she returned with Emma in her arms, Daniel's expression had softened considerably. "Beautiful baby," he said again. "She has her father's eyes." "People keep saying that," Sarah replied, settling Emma in her lap. "Sometimes it makes me happy and sometimes it just makes me miss him more. Sarah, what I'm about to suggest might sound strange, but I want you to hear me out completely before you decide anything." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Okay. I'd like you and Emma to come live with me. Not permanently, not as anything other than what it is. You need help raising your daughter, and I need purpose in my life again. The house is big enough for all of us, and I have more than enough money to support a family." Sarah stared at him, completely taken aback. "Akira, I don't understand. You barely know us, that's true," Daniel admitted. "But sometimes life puts people in your path for a reason. I've been praying since Margaret died, asking for some way to honor her memory, some way to keep living instead of just existing. And you think taking in a widow and her baby is the answer? I think helping Emma grow up might be the answer. I think giving you time to grieve and heal without worrying about money might be the answer. I think having a child's laughter in the house again might be the answer for all of us." Sarah looked down at Emma, who was studying Daniel with the intense focus that babies sometimes display. "This is crazy. People don't just move in with strangers." "We're not strangers anymore," Daniel said gently. "We're two people who understand loss, who understand what it means to have your whole world change in an instant. And we both want what's best for Emma. What exactly are you suggesting? What would this arrangement look like?" Daniel had clearly thought this through. "You and Emma would have your own space in the house, your own rooms, your own privacy. I'd provide food, shelter, everything Emma needs. In return, you'd let me help raise her, let me be part of her life in whatever way feels comfortable. Like a grandfather, like family," Daniel said simply. "Whatever kind of family we need to be for each other." Sarah felt tears starting again, but they weren't entirely tears of sadness. For the first time since Michael's death, someone was offering her a path forward that didn't involve doing everything alone. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "Of course you do. It's a big decision. But Sarah, Emma won't be little forever. Every day you struggle alone is a day she doesn't get the attention and care she deserves. And every day I sit in that empty house is a day I waste the life Margaret wanted me to keep living." Emma had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, her tiny fist curled around Sarah's finger. Looking at her daughter's peaceful face, Sarah tried to imagine what Michael would want her to do, what choice would give Emma the best possible life. Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she found herself weighing Daniel's unexpected offer against the harsh realities of her situation. By morning, she had made a decision she never thought she would consider. But first, she needed to know more about the man who was proposing to reshape her life. She called the hospital where she used to work and spoke to Linda, the head nurse who had become something of a friend during Sarah's time there. "Daniel Crawford?" Linda repeated when Sarah asked about him. "Oh, honey, everyone in town knows Daniel. He's been here for about 15 years, maybe more. Used to work as a forest ranger before he retired. His wife, Margaret, was a saint, volunteered at the Children's Hospital, organized charity drives. Such a tragedy when she passed." "What do you know about him personally?" Sarah asked, bouncing Emma gently as the baby fussed. "He's solid, Sarah. The kind of man who helps his neighbors without being asked, who shows up when there's trouble. After Margaret got sick, he took care of her at home for 2 years. Never complained, never asked for help. We all respected how devoted he was." This conversation was followed by several others. Sarah called the local grocery store, the gas station, even the pastor at the church Daniel said he attended. Every person she spoke to had the same basic message. Daniel Crawford was a good man who had loved his wife deeply and was struggling with his grief. That evening, Sarah made the 20-minute drive up into the mountains to see Daniel's house for herself. The winding road led through thick forests of pine and oak, climbing steadily until it opened into a clearing where a large log cabin sat surrounded by well-maintained gardens. Daniel met her at the front door, seeming genuinely pleased to see her and Emma. "I was hoping you'd come by," he said. "I want you to see everything before you make any decisions." The house was beautiful in a rustic, comfortable way. Large windows looked out over the forest, and the interior was decorated with handmade quilts and sturdy furniture that spoke of years of happy living. Photographs of Daniel and Margaret covered the mantelpiece, showing a couple who had clearly been devoted to each other. "Margaret loved this place," Daniel said, noticing Sarah looking around. "We built it together, planned every room. She always said it was too big for just the two of us, that it was meant for a family." He showed Sarah through the house, pointing out a bedroom that could be hers and a smaller adjoining room that would be perfect as a nursery for Emma. Both rooms had large windows and plenty of space, far more than the cramped apartment Sarah currently called home. "The isolation doesn't bother you?" Sarah asked, looking out at the forest that surrounded the property. It bothered Margaret sometimes, especially when she got sick and wanted to be closer to the hospital. "But for raising a child, I think it's perfect. Safe, quiet, plenty of room to explore and grow." Emma seemed fascinated by the house, her eyes wide as she took in the high ceilings and the gentle sounds of wind in the trees outside. When Daniel held out his finger, she grasped it immediately, her tiny fist holding tight. "She likes you," Sarah observed. "Children are good judges of character," Daniel replied. "They sense things adults miss sometimes." Over dinner, Daniel shared more about his life with Margaret, their dreams of having children, and how empty the house had felt since her death. "I wake up every morning and for just a moment I forget she's gone," he admitted. "I still set 2 coffee cups out of habit." "I do the same thing," Sarah said quietly. "I keep expecting Michael to come home from work. Sometimes I even cook enough dinner for 2 people without thinking about it. Grief is strange that way. It makes you live in 2 worlds at once, the one where they're still with you and the one where you have to figure out how to go on without them." After dinner, Daniel showed Sarah the property outside. There was a small barn that he said could be converted into a playhouse when Emma got older, gardens where Margaret had grown vegetables and flowers, and a clear stream that ran along the back of the property. "It's beautiful here," Sarah said, imagining Emma as a toddler running through the gardens, playing by the stream under careful supervision. "It's peaceful," Daniel agreed. "Sometimes I think that's what we all need when life gets too hard to handle. A place where we can heal." That night, after returning to her apartment, Sarah sat up late thinking about Daniel's offer. She made a list of pros and cons, trying to approach the decision logically despite the emotional weight of it all. The advantages were obvious: financial security for Emma, help with childcare, a safe environment away from the memories that haunted her current home. Emma would have space to grow, a father figure to provide stability, and Sarah would have time to grieve and eventually figure out her next steps. The disadvantages were harder to define but just as real: living with a man she barely knew, becoming dependent on someone else's generosity, the possibility that the arrangement might not work out and she'd have to start over again. But as she looked at Emma sleeping in her crib, Sarah realized that her own comfort mattered less than her daughter's future. Emma deserved the best possible start in life, and right now Daniel's offer provided that in ways Sarah couldn't manage alone. The next morning, Sarah called Daniel and asked if they could meet again. This time he came to her apartment bringing fresh coffee and pastries from the bakery in town. "I've been thinking about your offer," Sarah said without preamble, "and I have some questions. Ask me anything. What happens if this doesn't work out? What if we discover we can't live together? Or if you decide you don't want the responsibility after all?" Daniel considered this seriously. "Then we figure something else out. I'm not the kind of man who abandons people, Sarah. If I make a commitment to you and Emma, I'll honor it even if the situation changes." "What about dating? What if you meet someone? Or if I eventually want to start seeing people again?" "We'll deal with that when it happens. Right now we're both focused on different things. But if the time comes when either of us wants to pursue other relationships, we'll talk about it honestly and figure out how to make it work." Sarah took a deep breath. "What about Emma calling you? I mean, what would she call you when she starts talking?" Daniel's eyes softened. "Whatever feels right to all of us. I'm not trying to replace her father, Sarah. I'm just trying to be part of her life in whatever way you're comfortable with." "And you really think this could work?" Living together as some kind of unconventional family? I think families come in all shapes and sizes, Daniel said. I think Emma needs stability and love, and you need support and time to heal. I think I need purpose and the chance to honor Margaret's memory by helping raise a child she would have loved. Those needs don't have to match traditional arrangements to be real. Sarah looked at Emma, who was awake and alert in her bouncer, watching the conversation with the serious expression babies sometimes wore when adults were discussing important matters. Okay, Sarah said finally. Let's try it. But I want to move slowly. Maybe start with visits and see how everyone adjusts. Daniel's face broke into the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him. That sounds perfect. We'll take it one day at a time. And if anyone gets uncomfortable, we'll reassess. As they shook hands on the agreement, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since Michael's death: hope for the future. The transition happened gradually over the next 3 weeks. Sarah began by bringing Emma to Daniel's house for afternoon visits, staying for lunch and letting the baby nap in the room that would eventually become her nursery. Daniel proved to be surprisingly natural with Emma, holding her confidently and seeming to instinctively know when she needed feeding or changing. "You're good with her," Sarah observed one afternoon as Daniel walked around the living room with Emma, who had been fussy until he picked her up. "Margaret and I spent a lot of time around children," Daniel explained. "Her sister had 4 kids and we helped out whenever they visited. Margaret always said I'd make a good father someday." His voice carried a note of old sadness, but also something new, a kind of contentment that came from finally having a child to care for. During these visits, Sarah learned more about Daniel's life. He had been a forest ranger for 30 years before retiring, which explained his comfort with the isolation and his practical approach to problem solving. His house was entirely self-sufficient, with a generator for power outages, a well for water, and enough stored food to last through the harsh mountain winters. "What did you and Margaret do for entertainment up here?" Sarah asked one day as she watched him efficiently prepare formula for Emma, while simultaneously starting dinner for the adults. "We read a lot, played cards. Margaret was teaching herself to paint before she got sick. We had a garden that kept us busy in the summers, and I did a lot of woodworking in the winters." Sarah noticed the evidence of his woodworking throughout the house. Custom shelves, a beautiful dining room table, intricate picture frames that held photos of his life with Margaret. "Would you teach me?" she asked impulsively. "The woodworking, I mean. I think I'd like to learn something new." Daniel's face lit up. "Margaret asked me the same thing. I'd started building her a workbench in the barn before she got too sick to use it. Maybe we could finish it together." These conversations revealed a man who had spent years learning to create and nurture, skills that translated naturally to caring for Emma. He seemed to anticipate the baby's needs almost as well as Sarah did, and Emma responded to him with the easy trust that infants reserve for people who genuinely love them. The first overnight stay happened almost by accident. Sarah had been visiting for the day when a sudden snowstorm made the mountain roads dangerous. "You should stay the night," Daniel suggested, looking out at the swirling snow. "The weather service says it'll clear by morning." Sarah felt nervous about this next step, but Emma was already settled and content, and the idea of driving down the mountain in the storm made her anxious. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose. Sarah, if this arrangement is going to work, you need to stop thinking of yourself as an imposition. This is your home now, whenever you want it to be." That night, as Sarah put Emma to bed in the nursery Daniel had prepared, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since Michael's death. The room was warm and safe, with a beautiful wooden crib that Daniel had built himself and soft blankets that had belonged to Margaret's nieces and nephews. "She seems happy here," Daniel observed quietly from the doorway. "She does," Sarah agreed, watching Emma's peaceful sleep. "I think the quiet helps her rest better than she does in town with all the traffic noise." Over breakfast the next morning, Daniel made a suggestion that surprised Sarah. "What would you think about homeschooling Emma when she gets older? I know it's years away, but this area doesn't have great schools, and Margaret always said she wanted to teach children someday." Sarah had never considered homeschooling, but as she thought about it, the idea made sense. "You think you'd want to help with that?" "I think I'd love to help with that. I may not have formal teaching experience, but I know about nature, about practical skills, about how to learn from books and from life. And you have medical training, which means you understand science and how to research things thoroughly. The conversation continued as they planned Emma's hypothetical education, and Sarah realized they were talking about a future together, not just a temporary arrangement. The thought should have frightened her, but instead it felt like the first solid ground she'd found since Michael's death. A week later, Sarah made the decision to move in permanently. She packed up the apartment, donated most of the furniture she wouldn't need, and loaded her car with the belongings that mattered most. Emma's things, her own clothes, the photo albums and mementos from her life with Michael. Daniel helped her carry boxes into the house, setting up her bedroom exactly the way she wanted it, and making sure Emma's nursery had everything a growing baby might need. He had even installed a baby monitor system that would let Sarah hear Emma from anywhere in the house. "I want you to feel free to change anything you don't like," Daniel said as they arranged Sarah's books on the shelves in what had become her bedroom. "This is your home now, not just a place you're staying." That first night of permanent residence, Sarah lay in bed listening to the sounds of the house and the forest beyond. It was so different from the apartment in town, where sirens and traffic had provided a constant background noise. Here she could hear the wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl, and the gentle sounds of the house settling around them. When Emma woke for her middle-of-the-night feeding, Sarah was surprised to find Daniel already in the kitchen, warming a bottle and preparing everything she would need. "You don't have to do that," Sarah said, but she was touched by the gesture. "I want to help," Daniel replied simply. "Besides, I was already awake. I don't sleep as soundly as I used to." As Sarah fed Emma in the comfortable rocking chair Daniel had placed in the nursery, she found herself thinking about the strange path that had led her here. 3 months ago, she had been planning her return to work after maternity leave, looking forward to Michael coming home each evening, building the normal life they had imagined together. Now she was living in a mountain cabin with a man she barely knew, raising her daughter in an arrangement that would have seemed impossible before tragedy forced her to consider new possibilities. But as she looked around the nursery, with its handmade furniture and careful attention to every detail Emma might need, Sarah realized that sometimes the unexpected paths in life led to places of safety and love that couldn't have been imagined in advance. Emma finished her bottle and fell back asleep easily, and Sarah placed her gently in the crib Daniel had crafted with such obvious care. When she turned to leave the room, she found Daniel waiting in the hallway, not intrusively, but ready to help if she needed anything. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, and she meant it for everything: the safe place to live, the help with Emma, the chance to grieve and heal without having to worry about survival. "Thank you for letting me be part of this," Daniel replied, and Sarah understood that he was grieving too, that helping raise Emma was giving him a way to honor Margaret's memory and find purpose in his life again. As they said goodnight and went to their separate rooms, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected to feel again so soon: the comfort of not being alone in the responsibility of raising her child. 6 months into their unconventional living arrangement, Sarah woke one morning to the sound of Emma's delighted laughter coming from the kitchen. It was a sound that had become common in the house, but it still filled her with joy every time she heard it. Emma was almost a year old now, sitting up on her own and showing signs that she would be crawling soon. Sarah found Daniel sitting on the kitchen floor with Emma between his legs, playing peekaboo with a kitchen towel. Emma's face was bright with happiness, her hands reaching for Daniel's beard whenever he leaned close enough. "Good morning." "You too," Sarah said, accepting the cup of coffee Daniel had already prepared for her. This had become their morning routine. Daniel would get up early, start the coffee, and entertain Emma while Sarah woke up slowly. "She's been awake for about 20 minutes, Daniel reported. "Fed her the bottle you prepared last night, changed her diaper, and now we're working on her sitting balance." Sarah marveled at how naturally this partnership had developed. They shared Emma's care without formal discussions about who did what, each stepping in when the other needed rest or help. Daniel had proven to be endlessly patient with the sleepless nights, the constant feeding schedule, and the way a baby's needs could interrupt any other plans. "I was thinking," Sarah said as she settled into her chair with her coffee, "maybe it's time to start thinking about Emma's first birthday party." Daniel's face brightened considerably. "I'd love that. Margaret always said birthdays should be celebrated properly, especially first birthdays." I was wondering if we should invite some people from town. I know Emma won't remember it, but it might be good for us to have some social connection. This was something they had discussed before. Living on the mountain was peaceful and safe, but it could also be isolating. Sarah sometimes worried that they were becoming too dependent on each other, too cut off from the outside world. "Who were you thinking of inviting?" Daniel asked, lifting Emma and placing her in her high chair for breakfast. "Linda from the hospital, maybe. The pastor from your church. Some of the neighbors we've met." Daniel nodded as he prepared Emma's morning cereal. The baby food and formula routine as familiar to him now as it was to Sarah. "I think Margaret would have loved planning a first birthday party. She always went overboard for celebrations." As they discussed party plans, Sarah realized how comfortable their life had become. She had been worried at first about the practical aspects of living with a man she didn't know well, but Daniel had proven to be considerate and respectful in every way. He gave her privacy when she needed it, helped with Emma's care without taking over, and provided emotional support without being intrusive. The house itself had become truly home to both Sarah and Emma. Emma's toys were scattered throughout the living areas. Her high chair sat permanently at the dining room table, and her schedule dictated the rhythm of all their days. Daniel had child-proofed the entire house as Emma became more mobile, installing safety gates and covers for electrical outlets with the same careful attention he brought to everything else. That afternoon, while Emma napped, Sarah and Daniel worked together in his woodshop, finishing a rocking horse he was building for Emma's birthday. Sarah had become quite skilled with the tools over the past months, and they worked together easily, their movements coordinated through practice. "I never thought I'd enjoy this kind of work," Sarah said as she carefully sanded one of the horse's legs. "There's something satisfying about building something with your hands." Margaret felt the same way, Daniel replied. She said it was the opposite of her volunteer work at the hospital, where everything was about helping people through difficult times. This was about creating something beautiful and lasting. Sarah had grown comfortable with Daniel's references to Margaret. At first, she had worried that living in his dead wife's house might feel strange or inappropriate. But Daniel's memories of Margaret were warm and inclusive rather than possessive. He spoke of her as someone who would have loved Emma, who would have welcomed Sarah into their home. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sarah said as they worked. "Of course. Do you ever feel guilty about this? About being happy again, I mean. Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying Michael by enjoying my life here." Daniel set down his sandpaper and looked at her seriously. "I think Margaret would be furious with me if I wasn't happy again. She made me promise near the end that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life grieving for her. She said grief was for love, but living was for the people who still needed us." Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom in those words. Michael used to say that Emma was his gift to the future. He wanted her to have the best possible life, even if he couldn't be part of it. "Then we're honoring both of them by making sure Emma grows up loved and cared for," Daniel said simply. "There's no betrayal in choosing life over endless grief." Their conversation was interrupted by Emma's crying from the nursery. As they had done countless times before, they both headed toward the sound, but Sarah gestured for Daniel to continue. She had noticed that Emma often woke up in better moods when Daniel was the first person she saw, his calm presence seeming to soothe her in ways that Sarah's worried energy sometimes couldn't. When Daniel returned carrying a sleepy but content Emma, Sarah felt a moment of pure gratitude for the strange circumstances that had brought them all together. Emma looked perfectly at home in Daniel's arms, her small hand gripping his shirt as she studied the woodshop with curious eyes. "What do you think, little one?" Daniel asked Emma, showing her the rocking horse they were building. "Will you like riding this when it's finished?" Emma reached toward the wooden horse with obvious interest, and Sarah could almost see her in a few months, old enough to sit on the rocking horse and play in the workshop while they worked on other projects. That evening, after Emma was fed and settled for the night, Sarah and Daniel sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and pink. This had become their routine, this quiet time to talk about the day and plan for tomorrow. "I got a letter from the hospital today," Sarah said, pulling the envelope from her pocket. "They're offering me a part-time position 3 days a week if I want to come back to work." Daniel was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see him thinking through the implications. "What do you want to do?" "I'm not sure. Part of me misses the work, misses feeling useful in that way. But part of me loves being here with Emma, watching her grow and change every day." "You know I'd support whatever you decide," Daniel said. "If you want to work, we can figure out childcare. If you want to stay home, that's fine too. What would you prefer?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about his opinion. "I'd prefer whatever makes you happy," Daniel replied. "But if I'm being honest, I love having you both here. I love being part of Emma's daily life, seeing her reach all these little milestones." Sarah understood what he meant. In the past few months, Emma had become the center of both their worlds in the best possible way. Her first solid foods, her first attempts at crawling, her developing personality that showed glimpses of both determination and sweetness. "Maybe I could try the part-time work," Sarah said finally. "See how it feels to be back in that world but still have most of our time here." "That sounds like a good compromise," Daniel agreed. "And Sarah, you should know that whatever you decide about work, this is your home for as long as you want it to be. You and Emma aren't guests here anymore. You're family." The word family hung in the air between them, carrying weight and meaning that neither of them had fully acknowledged before. They weren't related by blood or marriage, but they had become something deeper than roommates or even close friends. They were people who had chosen to build a life together around the needs of one small child. "Family," Sarah repeated softly, testing the word. "I like the sound of that." That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she thought about how much her life had changed since that day in the cemetery when Daniel had first approached her. She had been broken then, overwhelmed by grief and the impossible task of raising Emma alone. Now, as she listened to the familiar sounds of the house settling around them, and Daniel's quiet movements as he checked the locks and turned off the lights, Sarah realized she had found something she never expected. A new kind of happiness built on shared purpose and mutual care. Emma was thriving in this environment, developing into a confident, curious baby who seemed to take Daniel's presence in her life as natural and right. She had two adults who loved her completely, who worked together to meet her needs, who were planning a future that included her education, her happiness, her growth into the person she was meant to become. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, she whispered a quiet thank you to Michael, wherever he might be, for the daughter who had led her to this unexpected family, and to Margaret, whom she had never met but whose generosity of spirit had made this new life possible. Emma's first birthday party took place on a warm Saturday in late spring, with the mountain air filled with the scent of blooming wildflowers and the sound of birds welcoming the season. Sarah had spent weeks planning the celebration, wanting it to be perfect not just for Emma, but as a way of introducing their unconventional family to the community. The guest list had grown beyond Sarah's original modest plans. Linda from the hospital came with her husband and teenage daughter. Pastor Williams arrived with his wife and brought a beautiful handmade wooden cross for Emma's room. Several of Daniel's neighbors from down the mountain made the drive up, curious to meet the young woman and baby who had brought new life to Daniel's home. Daniel had built a small playground area in the yard specifically for the party, complete with a sandbox and low swings that Emma could use as she grew older. The rocking horse they had finished together sat prominently on the front porch, painted in bright colors that caught Emma's attention immediately. "This is beautiful," Linda said to Sarah as they watched Emma crawl around on a blanket spread under the large oak tree in the front yard. "Look how happy she is. And Daniel, I have to say, you've taken to fatherhood like you were born for it." Sarah felt a moment of awkwardness at the word fatherhood, unsure how to explain their relationship to people who didn't know their story. But Daniel handled it with his usual grace. "Emma has brought a lot of joy to this old house," he said simply. "Sarah and I are just trying to give her the best life we can." Throughout the afternoon, Sarah watched the interactions between Daniel and their guests with growing appreciation for the man he had become in her life. He was comfortable with everyone, sharing stories about Emma's development, showing off the improvements he had made to the house for her safety, talking about their plans for her future education. When it came time for Emma to open her presents, she was more interested in the wrapping paper than the gifts themselves, which made everyone laugh. But she showed clear delight in the musical toys, the soft books, and especially the small wooden blocks that Daniel had carved and painted for her. "She's going to be a builder like her grandfather," Pastor Williams observed. Watching Emma stack the blocks with determined concentration, Sarah started to correct him, to explain that Daniel wasn't actually Emma's grandfather. But she caught Daniel's eye and saw him shake his head slightly. He was right, she realized. These people saw what they saw, a family that worked, a child who was loved, adults who had found a way to create something good together. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, several people made comments that warmed Sarah's heart. "You've found a good life here," Linda told her privately. "Emma is thriving and you look happier than I've seen you." "Since before Michael died, Daniel's a lucky man," one of the neighbors said to Sarah. "Margaret would be so pleased to see him helping raise such a beautiful child." After everyone had gone, and Emma was napping, exhausted from her big day, Sarah and Daniel sat on the porch cleaning up the party supplies and reflecting on how well everything had gone. "People kept referring to you as Emma's grandfather," Sarah said. Not sure how Daniel felt about that assumption. "Did that bother you?" Daniel asked. "No, actually it didn't. It felt natural, I guess. Accurate even if it's not technically true," Daniel smiled. "I've been thinking about that myself. I know I'm not her grandfather by blood, and I'm not trying to replace Michael as her father. But I am the older man in her life who loves her and wants to help raise her. If that makes me a grandfather figure, I'm honored by it." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, gathering decorations and putting away the folding chairs Daniel had borrowed from the church. As they worked, Sarah found herself thinking about how naturally they functioned as a team, not just in caring for Emma, but in all the practical aspects of running a household and maintaining a home. "I've been thinking about the job offer from the hospital," Sarah said as they finished cleaning up. "I'd like to try it, but only if you're sure you want to take care of Emma while I'm working." "I've been hoping you'd decide to try it," Daniel admitted. "Not because I want you out of the house, but because I think you miss using your medical skills. And honestly, I'd love to have some one-on-one time with Emma. I want to be a real part of her daily life, not just someone who helps her mother." Sarah realized that Daniel's desire to care for Emma wasn't just about helping her, but about his own relationship with the baby who had become the center of his world. "You want to be her primary caregiver sometimes. I want to be someone she can depend on completely, the way she depends on you. I want her to know that I'm not just her mother's friend who lives in the same house. I want to be family to her in every real sense." The following Monday, Sarah called the hospital and accepted the part-time position. She would work 3 12-hour shifts per week, leaving 4 full days at home with Emma, and giving Daniel 3 days each week when he would be Emma's primary caregiver. The first day Sarah returned to work felt strange and familiar at the same time. She had forgotten how much she enjoyed the intellectual challenge of nursing, the satisfaction of helping patients through difficult times, the camaraderie with her colleagues. But she also found herself checking her phone constantly for updates from Daniel about Emma's day. The text messages he sent throughout her shift painted a picture of a man completely comfortable in his role as caregiver. Emma ate all her breakfast and tried to feed some to the cat, took a good morning nap after playing with blocks, currently covered in mashed sweet potato but seems very pleased with herself. When Sarah arrived home that evening, she found Daniel reading to Emma in the living room, the baby sitting in his lap and occasionally reaching out to touch the pictures in the book. Emma looked up when Sarah entered, giving her a huge smile, but she didn't seem distressed by Sarah's absence or confused about who had been caring for her all day. "How did it go?" Sarah asked, settling into the chair next to them. "It was wonderful," Daniel said, and Sarah could see that he meant it completely. "We had our own routine, our own way of doing things. She napped better than usual, maybe because she was tired from playing so much." Over the following weeks, this pattern established itself comfortably. On Sarah's workdays, Daniel and Emma developed their own rhythms and traditions. He would take her for walks in the woods, teaching her the names of birds and trees even though she was too young to understand. He built an enclosed play area in the yard where she could crawl safely outdoors. He started a photo album documenting her development, taking pictures that he would later share with Sarah. "I think she's going to walk soon," Daniel reported one evening after Sarah returned from work. "She's been pulling herself up on everything and taking steps while holding onto the furniture." Sure enough, Emma took her first independent steps the following week, walking from Daniel's outstretched arms to Sarah's, both adults cheering and crying at the same time. It was a moment that felt completely natural to share, a milestone that belonged to all 3 of them. That night, as they put Emma to bed together, Sarah realized that they had become exactly what Daniel had suggested that first day in the cemetery: a family, defined not by traditional relationships but by love and shared commitment to one child's well-being. "Thank you," Sarah said to Daniel as they turned off the lights in Emma's room. "For what? For keeping your promise? For making this work? For loving her the way you do?" Daniel smiled in the dim hallway light. "Thank you for trusting me with both of you. This is the life Margaret and I always dreamed of having." As they went to their separate bedrooms, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected family they had created together, built on loss but sustained by love and the daily miracle of watching Emma grow into the confident, happy child she was becoming. 2 years later, Sarah stood in the kitchen watching through the window as Daniel pushed Emma on the swing set he had built in the backyard. Emma, now almost 3 years old, was laughing with pure joy, her dark hair flying behind her as she pumped her little legs to go higher. "More. Grandpa Dan. More!" Emma called out using the name she had given Daniel when she first started talking. It had started as Dan Dan and evolved into Grandpa Dan, a title that Daniel wore with obvious pride. Sarah smiled at the scene, marveling at how completely normal this life had become. Emma knew no other reality than this mountain home with 2 adults who loved her completely. She had Sarah's medical textbooks to flip through, Daniel's workshop tools to examine under careful supervision, and acres of forest to explore as she grew more adventurous. The past year had brought its challenges and changes. Sarah had gradually increased her work schedule at the hospital to 4 days a week, finding that she enjoyed the intellectual stimulation and the financial independence it provided. Daniel had embraced his role as Emma's primary caregiver on those days, developing educational activities and adventures that helped shape Emma's curious, confident personality. Emma was speaking in full sentences now, asking constant questions about everything she encountered. "Why do birds fly, Mama? Where do the trees go in winter, Grandpa Dan? Can I help you cook dinner?" Her vocabulary was advanced for her age, probably due to the constant conversation from 2 adults who treated her as a full participant in their daily lives. The adoption papers had been finalized 6 months earlier. After much discussion and consultation with lawyers, Daniel had legally adopted Emma as his granddaughter, giving her his last name and ensuring that she would inherit his property and have legal claim to his support. Sarah had worried initially about the legal implications, but Daniel had insisted it was important for Emma's security and his own peace of mind. "I want her to know she belongs here permanently," Daniel had explained. "I want her to have the same legal protections she would have if she were my biological granddaughter." The adoption ceremony had been small and private, held in the judge's chambers with only Sarah, Daniel, Emma, and Pastor Williams present. Emma had been more interested in the judge's gavel than the legal proceedings, but Sarah had cried tears of joy at the official recognition of what their family had become. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, Emma helped by setting the table with her own special plastic plates and cups. She chattered constantly as she worked, telling them about the birds she had seen during her swing time and asking if they could plant more flowers in the garden. "Grandpa Dan, can we make a house for the birds?" Emma asked as they sat down to eat. "A birdhouse?" Daniel clarified. "I think that's a wonderful idea. We could build it in the workshop this weekend. Can Mama help too?" "Of course I can help," Sarah said, tousling Emma's hair. "We could paint it bright colors so the birds will notice it." These conversations were typical of their family dinners now. Emma was included in all decisions about their home and activities, her opinions valued and her ideas taken seriously. She was growing up with a strong sense of her own voice and her place in their small family unit. After dinner, while Daniel and Emma worked on a puzzle in the living room, Sarah stepped outside to call her mother-in-law in California. She had maintained contact with Michael's family, sending regular photos and updates about Emma's development. "She looks so much like Michael in the latest pictures," Michael's mother said when Sarah described Emma's recent milestones. "I'm so grateful she's growing up in such a loving home. Michael would be so proud of the woman you've become, Sarah." These conversations were easier now than they had been in the early months after Michael's death. Sarah could talk about their life on the mountain without feeling like she was betraying Michael's memory. His family had come to understand that Daniel wasn't replacing Michael as Emma's father, but providing the stable male presence that Michael would have wanted for his daughter. When Sarah returned inside, she found Daniel reading Emma a bedtime story, the little girl curled up against his side with her favorite stuffed rabbit. This had become Daniel's special responsibility. the bedtime routine that bonded them in a way that was uniquely theirs. And the little bear found her way home to her family who loved her very much. Daniel was reading from one of Emma's favorite books. "Like I found my way to you and Mama," Emma said sleepily, making both adults exchange a meaningful look over her head. "That's right, sweetheart," Sarah said, settling into the chair beside the couch. "We all found our way to each other." After Emma was tucked into bed, Sarah and Daniel sat on the front porch as had become their nightly custom. The mountain air was cool and clear, filled with the sounds of night birds and the distant rustle of animals in the forest. "I got a call from the hospital today," Sarah said, breaking their comfortable silence. "They want to offer me a full-time position as head nurse in the emergency department." Daniel turned to look at her. "That's a big opportunity. What did you tell them?" "I told them I needed to discuss it with my family first," Sarah replied, smiling at how natural it felt to use that word. It would mean more time away from Emma, but also more financial security and professional advancement, Daniel observed. "What does your heart tell you?" Sarah had been thinking about this decision all day. "My heart tells me that Emma is thriving with our current arrangement. She gets individual attention from both of us. She's learning and growing in this environment, and she feels secure and loved. I don't want to change that unless there's a compelling reason." "And is there a compelling reason?" "I don't think so. We're financially stable, Emma is happy and healthy, and I enjoy the balance I have now between work and home. Sometimes the best decision is to keep doing what's working." Daniel nodded approvingly. Margaret always said that the hardest part of being an adult was learning when not to chase opportunities that looked good on paper, but didn't fit your actual life. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. Sarah thought about the conversation Emma had overheard earlier, about finding their way to each other. It was true in ways that went beyond the simple story they told Emma about how their family came to be. All three of them had been lost in different ways when they first met. Sarah had been overwhelmed by grief and single parenthood. Daniel had been isolated by loss and the emptiness of his house. Emma had been too young to be lost, but she had needed more stability and attention than Sarah could provide alone. Together, they had created something that worked for all of them. Emma was growing up confident and curious with two adults who were completely committed to her well-being. Sarah had found a way to honor Michael's memory, while building a new life that included both grief and joy. Daniel had found purpose and family in his later years, becoming the father and grandfather he had always wanted to be. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met that day in the cemetery?" Sarah asked. Daniel considered this. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Emma needed both of us and we needed her. Sometimes I think the universe has a way of bringing together the people who belong in each other's lives." That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she stopped by Emma's room to check on her sleeping daughter. Emma lay peacefully in the bed Daniel had built for her when she outgrew the crib, surrounded by the stuffed animals and books that filled her secure, happy world. Sarah thought about the scared, overwhelmed woman she had been 3 years ago, standing in that cemetery with no idea how she would manage to raise her daughter alone. That woman could never have imagined this life, this family, this sense of belonging and purpose that grew stronger every day. As she turned off the light in Emma's room, Sarah whispered the same quiet thank you she had spoken every night for 3 years. To Michael for the daughter who had led her to this unexpected family. To Margaret for the generous spirit that had made Daniel the man he was. And to whatever force in the universe had brought them all together when they needed each other most. In the morning, Emma would wake up calling for both her mama and her grandpa Dan. Secure in the knowledge that both would be there for her, she would spend another day exploring, learning, and growing in the mountain home where she belonged completely. And Sarah and Daniel would continue the quiet work of raising her together, honoring the past while building the future, proving every day that families can be created from love and commitment, regardless of blood or traditional relationships. It was, Sarah realized as she drifted off to sleep, exactly the life Michael would have wanted for his daughter, filled with love, security, and the promise of every opportunity to become whoever she was meant to be.